Hey guys, in this video we are going to go through the Starly quilt pattern just so I can show you a little bit more in depth when you look at a quilt pattern, how to prepare for it, and then I want to show you how I cut my fabric out for this, because one thing I do suggest is before we go on quilt retreat, if you struggle with cutting, at least try cutting a few of these fat quarters for your project. If you're really cool with cutting, go ahead and cut all of your fabrics. That way when you get to the quilt retreat, you can just sit down and sew. You don't have to worry about spending time cutting. So I have the downloaded PDF version, so I printed it all out. I know what I'm working towards right now. The ones that are in this is the throw size. Both of the ones that they have pictured in this are the throw size quilt. So here are your fabric requirements. You need to decide which one you want to work on. I'm going to be making the throw size also, which is 60 by 80. And for this one, I'm going to be cutting into the Secret Garden Fat Quarter Bundle. So, that just tells you how much you need for each one. I know that I need 12 fat quarters. I have, I think, a few more than that, but now we're going to get into the cutting instructions, okay? And this right here, if I can zoom in a little bit so that you can see it, that right here is what they suggest you cut out of your fat quarter, okay? These are the required cuttings, right? Out of the background, out of the solids and prints, which these are your fat quarters right here. Your background is a different level of, or different colors. It's not in your fat quarter pack. It's a different set of fabric as noted here in the background requirements, right? So you need 3 1/4 yards of background fabric. Your 12 fat quarters are what going to be your solids and your prints, okay? So this right here is what they're suggesting this is. Now, this looks a little bit complicated. It's not that bad. So I'm going to show you how I cut this right now. So this figure right here is what they gave to show us exactly how we're going to cut this fabric, okay? Now, this is tiny. I'm not fixing to work with this. So what I did, this is not to scale with any rulers whatsoever. I just rewrote out this where it has the name of each piece right here that corresponds with right here what they say we need to cut, okay? So this is the most elementary version of how you're going to cut this piece. So I'm looking at this as the outer piece of my fat quarter here. All right. I'm looking for easy ways that I can cut this apart because each piece is going to be a different size. And I started writing that over here and I decided to just go ahead and tell you about this part first because this is what I'm going to write first. This right here is what I'm going to write on it next. So I went ahead and I finished out. Let's see if I can get it clear. There we go. I went ahead and I finished out how many pieces I need of each of these. Now it's going to take 12 fat quarters because I'm working on the throw size quilt. So all of this will be dependent on which pattern you, or which size rather, that you chose to do. But I have my measurements here of the pieces that I'm going to need to cut. Okay, if you want to see if I can zoom into this a little bit, and if you want to write yours out like this, that's fine. If you want to do it completely different, that's cool too. But now I'm going to look for some easy cuts that I can make in this. Okay, so the first thing that I will probably decide to cut is right here. Let me get a marker. Okay, you think that would be an easy thing for me to find around here. Apparently today's theme is purple. So the first cut that I'm going to make is, actually, let's change that. The first cut that I'm going to make is right here. Of course this one is dried out, but you get the point, okay? So I'm going to cut right here. So I'm going to make this 7-inch cut right here. Now, this part is depending on which size quilt you choose to make. This part is going to work for every single fat quarter that you have in this pattern, okay? That's the first cut. The second cut that I'm going to make is going to be this cut right here. And I'm just going to go all the way across my fabric, okay? So this is going to be 3.5 plus 3.5. So you've got another 7-inch mark. And Then with what's remaining, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with that right now. So what I've got remaining, I'm going to go ahead and do 3, 6, 9, 12 inches and cut right here. Now, I could have done another cut all the way across the bottom here, but this gives me a bigger chunk of fabric right here. So that's why I'm doing it this way, okay? So, and then I will take and make this cut right here. So this is cut number 3, this is cut number 4, okay? And then I can divide this up into my 3-inch pieces once I have this cut off, because this is just wasted fabric. This you can save for another time, but we're not using it for this project. You can't see how dark I wrote there. There we go. Okay, so now I have these 2 chunks of fabric up here to work with. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make this cut right here. Okay, so I'm going to add 3.5 times 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, and then I'm going to trim off the extra right here. So this is cut number 5. Okay, then I'm going to cut this piece out of this piece that I have left over here. Make sure I cut this in half. Okay, so let's say 5, I don't know, 6, 7 are these cuts right here. This is probably cut number 8. Okay, and then I can divide all of these up into the 3.5-inch squares that they're at, right? So here on the top, I'm going to cut here to get my 7 by 7-inch piece, and that's cut number 9 or 10 or whatever we're at right now. Okay, and then I'm going to cut here to get this 7-inch piece. I don't know, I'm just gonna go with the number system we have right now. It's not perfect, but hopefully you're following along with me here. I know this is really scratchy and really like elementary level here description, but hopefully you'll see in a minute as I cut my fabric and that I'm following this guideline, okay? So I'll figure out a way to post this in the corner so you can see where I'm working at. And then the last final thing that I'll do, because these are just straight cuts, this one is I will go and I will cut along this edge here to trim off that fabric, and this edge here to trim off this fabric, right? Because these are probably just going to be wasted. Like, they're not even going to be like scrap worthy unless you're like a tiny micro scrapper, you know, crumb quilter. And then this I can probably save and use for a chunkier size scrap, but the rest of it, it's pretty straightforward. So really you have to look for those initial cuts that are going to be as straight all the way across as possible. You know, if I had originally looked at this and I tried to cut like this piece out and then this piece out and then this has like a hole right there, right? It's not going to work. It's going to be very difficult. But when you look for those initial straight cuts that you can make to chunk it up into smaller pieces, it gets easier. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can position the camera so you can watch me cut this first piece of fabric, and hopefully that helps you get a little bit clearer on how you can cut your fabrics before the retreat. Okay, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in this group and I will get to them and see if I can add some clarity to any parts that you're still confused on. Let's go ahead and iron out our fabric before we get started. I did go ahead and spritz with my flatter spray before I started ironing. If you have not used this stuff, it is amazing and it smells so nice when you're ironing. So I want to iron out each of my fat quarters to get the fabric really good and pressed. Okay, so I have a 6-inch by 24-inch ruler that I'm working with, and as soon as I find it, oh, here it is. This is my 6-inch by 12-inch ruler that I will also be using, okay? So let me get out my rotary cutter here. And I'm sorry, you'll have to forgive me. I'm kind of getting over a sinus infection. So let's go with the first cut that I said we would do, and that is a 7-inch cut, okay? But before we get to that, let's make sure that we have a nice straight edge here, because otherwise there's no use in measuring, right? There's no use in measuring. So what I'm going to do is I am going to line this up as nice and straight as possible, using kind of my fabric as my guide. I want to get the most out of this fat quarter that I can, even though there is a little bit of wiggle room. I'm going to use the lines on my ruler here, okay, to measure up, make sure it's nice and straight, so I know that I have that 90-degree angle there. Put my scraps off to the side, and again, I just cut like as little as possible there, okay. Then I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to have to use my cutting mat ruler in assistance with this ruler, because I am cutting a 7-inch piece and I don't have a 7-inch long ruler. So I'm going to line my fabric up with the straight line on my mat. I want to make sure everything is nice and flat as I'm doing it. I mean, it's not rocket science, but you want to do and be as accurate as possible. So I've got my fabric lined up here on what happens to be the 16-inch mark. I'm putting my ruler at the 15-inch mark, and I've got 6 inches here, 1 extra inch here. I'm going to put my hand on the ruler. Now, if you are, I'm doing it this way because my cutting surface is only so big, right? And I'm sorry, the lighting's a little bit funky in this because it is very, very, very overcast today. But I'm doing it this way because my cutting mat is, it's going this way. But in reality, it would be better if you had your ruler going this way so that you can cut alongside it and push forward instead of sideways. So I'm giving you tips and then doing the exact opposite of what I just told you to do. And then just cut nice and slow. If you feel the ruler shift a little bit when you're cutting, don't just keep going, okay? Stop, put it down. You can move the fabric a little bit, okay? Say if I only cut to there and I felt it like shift down, I'm gonna go back. I'm going to realign my ruler with what I've got on my cutting mat right here. And then I'm going to move my hand over and cut it again. Now, I have very large hands. If you have very small hands, you may push here, cut to here. Then I'm putting my hand on the ruler here so it doesn't slip or move in any way. Move your hand, cut a little bit more, hold the ruler down, move your hand, cut all the way across, okay? I have very large hands. I'm 5'9" tall and I have large hands, all right? If you're not able to do the way that I do it, it's okay. You know, we all work differently. Figure out how to make it work for you, okay? And so then my second cut is, again, 7 inches down. And I'm going to line up my fabric, again, same way I did before. Make sure it's nice and flat and I don't have any like weird wrinkles coming out. Okay. Doesn't really matter what line I'm lining up, but my fabric is lined up on one line. My ruler is 1 inch higher. And there is that 7-inch cut. Okay, and I'm just putting those to the side so that I can get my big cuts out of the way, and then I will go into the smaller cuts. And then this one, oh, I said I was going to do cut 3 here, okay? So, let's see, 3, 6, 9, 12. All right, that's cool. I can use my smaller ruler now from everything else here on out. So, I want to make sure that this is a nice straight edge because it's kind of got like the pinking on this side of my fabric just from the big mass cutters that they use at the fabric shops. Now I have a nice square corner. Again, I lined up my fabric, made sure I was cutting along this line on my cutting mat. And I'm going to use that as this side over here. So I want to do 12 inches from that side. If you're following along, you can see my very sketchy guide that I gave myself, right? Okay, so I want to do 12 inches from the very nice straight cut that I have. And exactly like I planned, that's a good chunk of fabric for another project. Okay, and then 3 inches down. 1, 2, 3, always double checking before I cut, because these are fat quarters. You don't want to end up having to replace some of these if you miscut. So 3 inches is what A5 is going to be. That's not a terrible piece. We could use this perhaps, okay? So let's put that over there. And then these pieces are 3 inches. So while I've got that out, I'm going to go ahead and cut my 3-inch pieces here. So 1, taking very careful time to line up my ruler. 2, 3, and perfect. 4. These are the A5s for that one piece of fabric. Okay, let's move on to this section where I'm doing more cutting. No, I'm not even going to add up. Where's my phone? Here it is. I'm not even going to add up what 3.5 times 4 is in my hair. I mean, in my hair. In my head. Can you tell I'm like still on cold medicine? Because I am. Okay, so 3.5 times 4, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of A4 across there, right? We've got 4 pieces of A4. All right, that is going to total up to 14. So, I lied. I do need my big ruler back. So let's go ahead and let's cut 14. Now, let's get this end straight, because I do have like the selvage on this side, and I want to go ahead and make that be part of my trash, which I have on the outside of the pattern right there. Okay, so go ahead and make that straight cut and get little pinking parts off. And then I want to use my 14-inch mark on my ruler, which is right there. I'm going to do a little trick here and go right there. Okay, so 14 inches. And then this gets trimmed in half again for cut number 8, which I should have like done letters or something, because I don't even know if we're on the right cut. So I want to do 3.5. So 1, 2, 3.5 on my ruler. We're basically cutting this in half, and just because I'm double checking again, we have 3.5 on this side. All right. Three and a half. It might be time for a new rotary blade soon. Okay. And then I can very carefully put these on top of each other and cut them at the same time. So if you're wondering, like, do I really have to cut each one of these 12 pieces individually? I will say you will probably be more accurate. But if you decide you want to like double them up and do 2 at a time, or you have like superior cutting skills and want to do 3 at a time, then that's okay. Just 3.5. You may have to get more fabric if you mess up, but that's totally your call. So these are 3.5 by 3.5 inch squares. This is our A4 pieces, okay? So I do feel comfortable doubling it up. That's A4. And A4. And I happen to have a piece of tape on my ruler that makes my 3.5 like super easy to do. If you have a way to mark that, or you have like some painter's tape or something, that is great. If you don't, you just have to very carefully make sure you're doing your 3.5 inch. Okay, and then what I have left is this extra piece over here, which was a 5.5 by 5.5 inch square. Despite it looking like a rectangle on my page, right? It's a square. My perception was off on that one, okay? So I'm going to measure 5.5 inch from my straight line, because this is where I put the selvage, okay? So just keep in mind, the selvage isn't bad to end up in your quilt, but it's not as pretty. It has a different texture. Okay, so that is scrap, and then I'm going to turn it, measure from the other side, and do 5.5 inch. This is my A3 piece, and then what's left is this right here, which is the top one, and this only has a couple cuts in it too. So I want to make sure that I even this edge up using the lines on my ruler. Cut off that pinking area, and then we're going to do 7 inches. So let's see, whoops. So a 7 inch square right here. I'm gonna use that same trick I did before. Well, I'm just putting another ruler on top because there is extra space on either side here that I don't want to have to guess at. I could use the lines on my cutting mat, would probably be really smart too, but I'm showing you a couple extra tricks here. If perhaps you don't have a cutting mat that you trust the lines on, or you just want to be double extra sure, I don't know. Okay, so here is an A1, 7 inches. This is an A1 also. And then we have an A2, which is 6.5 by 6.5. So let's do that. 6.5. That one I decided to just move the ruler on to make it a little bit easier, but I still kept my line right here, what I was doing. And now I can do 6.5 inches here. This is where my selvage is, so I'm keeping that out of it. Making sure that 6.5 is even here on my ruler, and it's flat across the bottom here because I want those nice right corners. Even though, as you see, this is not quite perfect. Measurements are perfect. Fabric, excuse me, fabric is not. All right, so, excuse me, there's my A2, A1, A3, A4s, and A5. There we go. Done. Ready to move on to the next step.